So let's look at an example now of complexity in argumentation. This is that sixth point. So I'm transitioning a little bit, but still talking about argument here. Corroboration, qualification, or modification addressing a prompt. This is that holistic point. And as Dr. Webb talked about the other day, I can't simply point at one sentence or one paragraph and say, there's my context. This is the one point that puts all the moving parts and pieces of an essay together, which is a maddening definition for you. I get that. I assure you, it's a maddening definition for your instructors. The colloquially nicknamed really good essay point, which does you not a lot of help in terms of that. It's the one rubric point that takes into account the overall sophistication, overarching nature of the work. So to corroborate, if you use enough evidence and reinforce those pieces of evidence to justify a claim in real detail, explaining how those pieces of evidence interlock to make or prove your case, you can make a complex argument. I cannot show you this because we would have to read an essay that did this. And as I said, we would read the whole essay. You and I'd be here for 10 to 12 minutes doing that and picking it apart. And we don't have enough time as it is. I got a whole act. I can be here for plenty of stuff, but we don't have time to do that and get where we need to get in 50, 55 minutes. Qualification, the kind of essay where throughout the argument you hedge. You're like, Americans were imperialist, but, or they were not imperialist, but, and kind of move on from there. You're making a concession to some limitations of your overall argument throughout the work with real elaboration, or modification to consider and incorporate alternative views or evidence into your essay when that time comes. So let's look at complexity. What could you do for our specific essay on imperialism? You could talk about the different ways the US had a role in the world and the ways that role expanded in detail on trade, on international agreements, the Portsmouth Peace Conference, which ends the Russo-Japanese War. Teddy Roosevelt arbitrated that agreement or mediated that agreement between the Japanese and the Russians, for which he earned the Nobel Peace Prize, showing Americans engaging in an independent role in the world as a third party sort of a peacemaker. Annexation, informal imperialism, all these with major detail and elaboration. Explaining similarities and differences. What was our style or flavor of expansion, our role in the world in Central America, compared to that expansion flavor of that role in South America, compared in the same essay to the expansion flavor in Asia and or in the Pacific. Doing this with nuance and detail would show the various moving parts of expansion, saying that not all various forms of this are the same. Or explaining in-depth connections to other time periods, like the efforts to establish international authority through negotiation with the British over Oregon, through Manifest Destiny and Texas independence and the war with Mexico, our negotiations with Texas and with Mexico prior to conflict and during and after conflict, or the elaboration on the real details that went into Indian removal, whether it was under the Jackson administration or before, during, or after that, excuse me. Any of these kinds of things, all in Louisiana, are agreements to purchase that from France. How is that similar or different than the things that we're seeing at the dawn of the 20th century? And really elaborate on those in detail. And here's the kicker. Each of these would involve the analysis of numerous pieces of evidence, serving as multiple variables to show that nuance or differentiation interwoven within the essay throughout the essay as part of the theme or argument. I can't show it to you because, as I said, we would be period 7, we'd be 20 minutes just on this alone. Complexity, incorporating in qualification. If you incorporated or elaborated upon evidence or argument that shows maybe the limits of our role and power in the world at this time. Open door policy, for example, we really never got the free trade opportunities that we sought in Asia, not to the degree that we wanted them. The complications of putting down the Philippine insurrection or the Philippine-American War that takes place after the United States takes the rule there, brings up a lot of real problems with the Democratic Republic trying to actually engage in imperial oversight. Or complexity and qualification. Here's an example, actually, again, of real student work. And this is a theme that was elaborated upon throughout this whole essay. These aren't my words. These are adolescent words. Qualifying your argument nuance. The US took many efforts to try to assimilate the Filipinos and have them have the same political and societal views as they did, meaning the Americans. This reflects the ongoing trend of that time of racial superiority, which is synonymous to how the US treated newly freed slaves at home. However, despite the imposing negative shadow the US cast over conquered lands due to our own nationalism, this feeling came from a genuine sense of morality and genuine care for other people. This is the argument the student then would make and elaborate on with detail throughout to qualify their argument. Imperialism was, not some things not so great, but there were some aspects and attributes of it that came from a sense of something positive. That's the argument they're going to make. You don't have to agree with that argument, but again, that's what a thesis is. It's your position on the question. As a reader, I'm willing to be sold provided you make the sale. This claim without evidence may or may not make the sale, and that's what has to go on throughout the work. Modification, again, incorporating and elaborating that evidence that would show or prove that limits the time. Modification is in shifting the position somewhat counter to the question. For instance, arguing that US global expansion was not as pronounced as maybe your textbook, the traditional interpretation, or even the prompt itself implies, taking a sort of countervailing theme. Or you could state or list the relative, instead of stating or listing the relative importance of these causes, you could prove their relative importance of these multiple causes again and again, coming back to evidence and coming back to why you were demonstrating how these other causes are not quite as important as the one I'm talking about for my role in the world. Corroboration, again, it would involve the analysis, same slide, of numerous pieces of evidence, multiple variables interwoven throughout the essay.